good evening. Feel free to finish getting your food and your drinks. We're also going to keep it open during the program, so as long as you promise to be quiet and respectful, you can continue to visit the bar and get more food during the program. So I'm Margaret Mueller. I'm the president and CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. Thank you so much for joining us for this really important discussion on how infrastructure, safety, and social inclusion impact our city's economy. We have an outstanding panel ready to share their insights on how the current administration's approach to these issues will help shape a stronger Chicago. Before we begin, I want to thank all the organizations and individuals who support Exec Club's mission to be the nexus of the Chicago business community. First, welcome and thank you to the members of our board of directors and the council of advisors who are in attendance today. I want to acknowledge them. Feel free to stand as your name is called, and I'll have you sit after that. So first, Nick Allen, Human Resources Director, CNA Insurance. JB Compt is not yet with us. He's the president of Ron & Meal Solutions. We should be walking in any minute. David Gupta, who's just, you're there. Co-founder and executive chairman of SDI Presence. Teresa Harmon, Chicago office managing partner, Sidley. Lynn Jekyls, Midwest region manager, Aon. And Carolyn Lynn, head of global talent management practices, Northern Trust. And Julie Scott, President and CEO, CTS Impact. Thank you all for your steadfast commitment and leadership to our mission. I want to extend a huge thank you to today's presenting sponsor, BMO. Thank you for sponsoring today's program, and our featured sponsor, CTS Impact. I'd also like to thank all of our season sponsors. All of these companies are who make all of our exceptional programming throughout the season possible. And finally, thank you to our members who are here tonight. You are the lifeblood of our organization. If you are not yet a member and you're interested in learning more, we have staff outside and look for anyone with a member badge, and I know they'd be happy to talk with you. So now, it is my pleasure to introduce our exceptional panel. With us tonight, we have Thomas Bamonte, Senior Advisor, Metropolitan Planning Council. Garion Gatewood, Deputy Mayor of Community Safety, City of Chicago. Beatrice Ponce de Leon, Deputy Mayor for Immigrant, Migrant, and Refugee Rights, City of Chicago. And Larry B. Snelling, Superintendent of Police, City of Chicago. And moderating tonight's conversation is Jeff Korzenik, Chief Economist at Fifth Third Bank. Jeff, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and delighted to be here. Let me set the stage a little bit with talking about the economy. We're now 4 years past that deep but short-lived recession of 2020, and more than 2 years past the start of the Federal Reserve Bank's aggressive interest rate hiking cycle. In many ways, the resiliency of the US economy and the Chicago economy has really defied expectations and has been truly remarkable. Nationally, we witnessed new highs in real GDP by the first quarter of 2021, payroll employment fully recovered by June of 22, and has continued to increase. But that doesn't tell the full story. Inflation, while moderated, is still high, and consequent elevated interest rates have been a tremendous burden to the average consumer. More profoundly and perhaps more enduring are workforce changes. A structural labor shortage, high levels of migration between states and cities, and a strong preference among workers for work from home and hybrid arrangements, depopulating central business districts. Adding to the urban challenges are heightened public safety concerns and an influx of migrants. As an economist and as the grandson of immigrants and the son of a refugee, I can say with confidence that the influx of people eager to work is a long-term positive for any economy, but it requires an investment of resources in the immediate term, and any such diversion of finite funds must be balanced against the needs of the existing citizenry. All this disruption has laid bare the reality of economic performance in various metropolitan areas. Through the Empowering American Cities project, Fifth Third and the Keenan Institute for Private Enterprise have modeled economic performance for 30 extended metropolitan areas, including Chicagoland. You'll find at your seats the Chicagoland snapshot. You can find more information about this on the project's website, empoweringAmericanCities.com, and you can register there for an event we'll be holding in Chicago on November 20th. Our analysis reveals a stark reality about the Chicagoland economy. Once you factor in the employment mix, population shifts, all the traditional factors, Chicago underperforms expectations and is somehow in economic terms less than the sum of its parts. In the regional snapshot you have in front of you, this is evident in a graph entitled Embedded Local Growth Characteristics on the third page. This is a surprising result, given the abundance of attributes that would support superior growth in any economy, superb institutions we have of higher education, a city filled with both man-made splendor and a glorious lakefront, a wealth of cultural and entertainment facilities, and an airport, highway, freight rail system with little equal. We are fortunate to have in place so many positives that would be impossible to build from scratch and are the envy of many aspiring competitor cities. Yet, to live up to its potential, Chicago must shore up its areas of challenge. That's the heart of our discussion today. We're honored to have such incredible speakers with us. We're looking forward to hearing their insights and engaging in a stimulating discussion about the future of the Chicagoland economy. Given the ongoing challenges, we're going to focus specifically on Chicago. We'll be touching on public safety, the migrant issue, and transportation. So let me get started. Superintendent Snelling, you're in the hot seat. With probably no stranger to that.
It's probably every day.
Yeah, so let's start out. We're going to bookend this discussion with public safety. We're going to start out with Superintendent Snelling, and we're going to come back and talk about public safety more, because I think this cuts across, as we know, so many issues. But let's start out with, how is public safety a vital component of strengthening the economy of Chicago? How do you enhance business engagement, get stronger safety in our business corridors throughout the city, including, of course, the Loop, the Central Business District?
Well, obviously, let's address the main concern. Chicago gets a black eye, especially as it relates to how it's seen with violence, crime, and obviously people have to feel safe. This is a beautiful city. I've been here all my life. There's so many things to see here. People like to converge upon the city and just engage in tourism. And if people are not feeling safe in doing that, then obviously we don't have that level of tourism. People are not engaging with our business communities. They're not shopping because they don't feel safe. So it's important that we create that safe space and that safe environment for everyone to come here, feel comfortable enough to walk without fear of being victimized by crime. And I think that is going to do a lot to help our businesses boom, and then to bring back the tourism that Chicago has always had.
Thank you. Let me switch gears and talk a little bit about transit. We talked about people leaving the city. At least one who's come back is Thomas Beaumonte, who's joined us from Dallas. We talked about physical safety. We also have to talk about financial safety, and we'll get to that in a minute, the financial safety of the strength of the transit system. But I want to ask you a foundational question, Thomas. You came back from Dallas. Dallas is a city that is the envy in terms of economic growth, only perhaps in terms of economic growth, but has a limited public transit infrastructure compared to Chicago. Why is public transit, what does public transit do for Chicago? And how can it enhance our economic growth?
Yes, I came back after 12 years in Dallas-Fort Worth. I was so impressed by the integration at all levels of government and the private sector, innovation, working together, be a platform for business. Very inspiring to see that integration. On transportation, though, Texas is putting all of its eggs in the automobile basket, and that puts a real tax on every household. I remember talking to the president of a junior college who said, I've got kids dropping out of my school because they can't afford an automobile. Or families, modest income families, having 3 automobiles to maintain just to get everybody to work and school. The strength of this region is we have this transit infrastructure that gives affordable mobility for all people, all classes, connects people to jobs and life opportunities, connects businesses to labor force, and we can either blow out our beautiful infrastructure and try to become the great urban splat that is DFW, or we can build on our existing base and use transit to provide a more equitable, sustainable ecosystem, both economically and environmentally.
Now, that's going to take investment and money. Can you talk a little bit about how can this be financed? There's this fiscal cliff that's being talked about for the transit system. What's the opportunity ahead and the new potential landscape?
Well, you certainly, how can I say, massage the sense of opportunity. But the fact is, our transit system, CTA, Metro, and PACE, face a $750 million annual deficit starting in 2026. And we have to find some way to fill it to maintain our existing transit system as it is, and perhaps find more revenue, maybe up to an extra $1.5 billion a year, to really improve our transit system for the entire region. There's a variety of options that are out there. Some are raising traditional taxes like sales taxes. Raise your hand if you are excited about any of these options. There's expanding the sales tax to include services, including professional services. There's also roadway generated revenue options. Do you use tolling? Do you use a cordon congestion pricing to raise revenue for transit? And I would submit that business leaders that you are, looking for more market-driven solutions that are equitable, effective, and can provide sustainable funding for our transit system through user fees is a much more attractive approach than, let's say, a payroll head tax or, again, expansion of general taxation. So I think there's a real opportunity for business community leadership here to say to the region, let's shift the paradigm from free roads to pricing our roadways so that we're shifting some demand to transit and we are providing sustainable revenue source for our public transit system.
Before we move on, I do have to ask, we've talked a little bit about what's changed post-COVID, work from home, hybrid work arrangements. Is that a threat to public transit's viability?
I don't think so. I mean, I think, those who lament, virtual work is depopulating the downtown and hurting the economy. The fact is, I'm sure those arguments were made when we shifted from 6 days a week to 5 days a week. Things change. We're now in the internet age. So we have to recognize that some of our transportation to life destinations will be done virtually, and accept that as being more effective for some of our life activities, including our jobs. But where people are and where they're traveling are changing. So transit is finding a lot of usage during off-peak times and in areas outside of the general trip to downtown paradigm that prevailed in the last century. So what needs to happen is transit needs to adjust, real estate will have to adjust, but our world is virtualized, at least in part, and we need to accept that and see that as an opportunity, not something to be tamped down. So I think there is a role for transit in it, but it may be in a different way, different service models, and even different areas.
I want to stay with workforce changes a little bit, but I want to move on to B. Well, let me give some numbers about the migrant situation in Chicago. As of June 10th, there were 6,835 residents in shelters in Chicago. Chicago has served over 43,200 new arrivals. That's a lot of people. Sometimes in the press, certain community organizations, sometimes politically, you hear a lot about the costs of supporting that large number of people. But in a workforce short world, that can be an investment. B, could you share a little with us about the city's strategy for how do you ensure that this is not a cost, but ultimately is an investment in what it can do for the city?
Yes, thank you. And I like the way you set the question up, because if we just look around this room, we have all come from an immigrant background, right? Everybody who is here came from somewhere else other than indigenous Native Americans who are in Chicago. And our city has had groups of immigrants come throughout its history. So in one way or another, we have helped to welcome them and integrate them, and they've become part of our communities, built businesses, churches, contributed just in so many ways to the life of our city. I think if we take the long view, we will see again, maybe in 5 or 10 years, that this recent group of people arriving through our southern border will be another group of immigrants who are contributing and living in this city and in our country. What the city has done first and foremost is stay true to its values of welcoming people as a welcoming city in a welcoming state, and looking humanely at how we could meet people where they were coming in. People started arriving on buses that were sent up here, from Texas, and we could have said there's no money and no will and let thousands of people become unsheltered and unhoused. What we chose to do instead was to meet their most basic needs for shelter, food, urgent medical care, and then partner with the state and the county to put people on a path to resettle and be part of Chicago. The state has contributed with housing, case management, and rental assistance. The county has seen over 90,000 visits in our county health system. In Chicago, at one point, we had 28 shelters and we're housing 15,000 people right around Christmas and New Year's. But as we did that work, we definitely were aware of the costs and began to implement cost-saving strategies that we've begun to see the results of that. And we have a lens not just towards helping this new population, but also how do we leverage this moment to build the type of system and infrastructure that Chicago needs. This is not a passing moment. We are seeing a new pattern of migration. There are conflicts around the world, there's climate change, there are other things that will be happening. We need to be prepared for that, and to do a better job of serving other unhoused Chicagoans. I think that's one thing that we've learned as well, is being able to create the type of shelter and housing supports that other Chicagoans need and deserve, and that we should be able to produce as we move forward. One thing that when we look to the future, in Illinois alone, we know that immigrants contribute about $20 billion in tax revenue because they buy food and clothes and cars, and they pay rent and purchase houses. They're consumers, and they even have a spending power estimated at about $51 billion. So if we were able to continue to harness that and support this new group of immigrants that are here, I think we could see the type of growth that we have seen over the years. And just another big figure that I've come across recently is it's estimated that over the next 10 years, this rise in immigration is going to lead to a boost in our GDP of about $7 trillion. So if we as cities are smart and figure out how to leverage the folks that are coming here, help them integrate and connect and become included in our communities, ultimately it can really support our workforce and our economic growth.
Just kind of before we go on to some of the financial questions around this, I just want to come back and reinforce how reliant, for integrating this population into our economy, how reliant are they on a good working public transit system? Are they coming with cars? Are they, what's the typical?
People are not coming with cars. Yeah. Some have purchased cars, and there are questions around that because we think, well, but people are buying cars so that they can go to work. As immigrants arrive here, people come to work and build a family. No one wants to come and live in a shelter for 2 years or panhandle, ask for money. They find ways to work, whether it's with work permits or without, and we know that they're using
the complexity
Yep.
that you have to support. How does an asylum seeker, can they work? Can
Yep.
refugees like my mother, can they work right away? How does it, what's involved, and why does that need the business community support?
That's a great question, and I think I want to share that folks that we are serving in our shelter system and that the state has supported in helping with resettlement are crossing the southern border and asking for asylum. So they're here legally, temporarily. They have a temporary permit. Some of them have an expedited work permit, which then gives them the possibility of working legally. We advocated with the federal government, Department of Homeland Security, USCIS, to come to Chicago and partner with us to expedite those work permits. And over the since about late November to now, we have filed over 7,000 applications, almost 3,500 have been approved. That was a strong partnership with the state, USCIS, and the Resurrection Project. We know that there will be limits to those work permits, but the more people are able to get them, the better. Other folks do what many people have done for centuries. They look for day jobs, they do contracting work, just a variety of jobs to be able to earn some funding, make a living. We have been advocating at the federal level for an expansion of the work permits to a greater number of people who have crossed the border, including Venezuelans and Colombians and Haitians. We see a growing number of Haitians arriving in Chicago. We know that if people can work, they will rely less on government. And we get calls every day from employers that want to hire new arrivals. They've asked us, can you channel people with work permits to us? We have job openings in a variety of jobs. Manufacturing, hospitality are top ones. But in Illinois, there's also agricultural jobs that go unfilled. So I think that the work permit issue is probably the most critical one. There are national organizations like ABIC, the American Business Immigration Coalition, that is advocating for work permits for this new population, as well as long-term undocumented. And these are coalitions that bring both Republicans and Democrats together because people know the importance of being able to work and contribute.
And you focused on asylum seekers. Are we getting refugees as well from Europe and Middle East?
Thank you for raising that. In the same period that we have been focused on the new arrivals, asylum seekers asking for asylum, Chicago has welcomed almost 40,000 Ukrainian refugees. And they came with full refugee status, so they come with work permits, with connections to community, to housing supports, to medical care. So the city didn't have to create those supports. The federal government created that supportive structure, funded it through the state, and almost 40,000 Ukrainians have resettled in the Chicagoland area. They also had a Ukrainian community here, a very vibrant Ukrainian community, whereas Venezuelans and Colombians did not. So they did not have sort of that automatic connection to community that many immigrant groups have had over the years. But we definitely see the dynamics and the differences in those two groups.
You talked with the refugees about support from the federal government. Let's talk about the costs of what the city is providing. So the city council approved an additional $70 million. How can the city get support or partner with the federal government, the state government? Because if you're building your workforce, everyone benefits. The cost shouldn't necessarily just fall on the city.
Right, the cost or the responsibility for creating and caring for so many people. I'm proud that our city has been able to work very closely with the state, the Department of Human Services, the governor's office, and with the county. And we have this collaborative approach that is a regional approach to how we will shelter and help resettle the people that are here. So when Chicago went back to City Council for an additional $70 million, it was part of this shared plan to sustain a certain number of shelter beds and the resettlement supports that we need to help people move through the shelter system and begin to become part of their communities. The county also went back to their legislative body and approved an additional $70 million that was then awarded to the city. And the state recently passed $182 million in the state budget. So that demonstrates a tremendous collaborative effort from the three levels of government, that as we go to the federal government for additional funding for resettlement, puts us in a stronger position. And I will just say that most of the funding that our federal government has allocated for this border issue, this asylum seeker mission, has gone to the border cities and border states because that's where they see people crossing. There's urgency in the number of people coming. But we have a growing resettlement operation happening not just in Chicago, also in New York, somewhat in Denver and DC. And so we have been in close communication with the White House, with DHS, with other federal and our elected officials to make sure that there is additional support for cities like Chicago that are the resettlement cities.
Thank you. Garen, you've been very patient. Well, never has a deputy mayor been asked to sit quiet for so long. So you're on the hot seat now. Let's talk about your new role as deputy mayor of community safety for the city of Chicago. You've heard migrant challenge, you've heard transportation challenge. Across all this is a public safety backdrop. Can you talk about how the city is prioritizing? What are the challenges? What are the intermediate and the long-term strategies for public safety from your view?
Yeah, so one, thank you for the question. You asked the question earlier, and I'm glad you didn't ask anybody from the city. You asked him about hybrid work, and I said, you couldn't be talking about us. We're in the office every day. We don't really hybrid. But really thinking about our approach to this work and this role as deputy mayor, it's always been about collaboration, right? And we look at opportunities to partner with folks from the business community, all across every agency, literally every agency in city government, to the state, to the county, and we try to make sure we're in lockstep with our partners. But to talk more about some of the things that we're looking at, I'll start with long-term, then I'll get into short-term. We went through this journey back in, when we started back in June, to roll out what we thought could be a really comprehensive approach to build out a strategic plan for community safety for the city of Chicago. We held 29 meetings with over 300 stakeholders representing an entire swath of people from around the city, victims and survivors of crime, youth, adults, gender-based violence advocates, LGBT community, faith community, business leaders, community-based organizations, you name it. We brought folks together to the table to really map out what a comprehensive approach could look like to not only address root causes of harm and violence, because we understood that it was also necessary to invest in people, especially in areas of the city that have been purposely disinvested in. But in doing that work, it's also clear and obvious that, you know, when you're addressing root causes for work, that is a long-term investment, right? Because you're not going to have a solution to problems that have been centuries in the making. So that's when it comes into the partnership and what we build with our partners over at CPD, CFD, OEMC, and so many other partners throughout the entire city. What does it look like for us to build out rapid responses? How does it look for us to constantly be in lock and step? I probably talk to this man next to be more than I talk to my wife on some weekends, because we are in constant conversation, because it's necessary so people understand that when we approach safety, it is not only from a holistic perspective, it is also how do we solve for some of the issues that we're seeing in the city now, right? I mean, we can talk about, and I'm sure we'll get into this, the success in the numbers and how crime is trending in the right direction. But what's that mean for the person who has been impacted by that crime, right? We can tell you the numbers are down, but like the superintendent said a moment ago, it's about how we actually help folks feel safe, right? And I think when we talk about how we measure success is how we get to a place where people actually feel safe. And, you know, as we've gone on this journey to really look at some of that long-term work, you know, I have to, you know, give a lot of thanks to the partners in the business community, from the civic community and other places who've come together to help raise $100 million to scale community violence intervention. You got some of the leaders in community violence intervention right here at the middle table who've been doing that work on the ground in conjunction with the Chicago Police Department, in a place where understanding that we have historically asked the Chicago Police Department to do entirely too much. So instead of just saying that, what's it look like to actually provide support? Because it's one thing to say it, right? But to actually build out a plan to offer support in areas where we have our CVI partners, we have our youth-based organizations, we have our faith organizations, and it's a matter of creating shared accountability so everybody plays a role in it. There's not a person who crosses through the city of Chicago that safety is not the number one thing on their mind. Safety is always going to be at the forefront. So how do we actually do our part to not only help people feel safe, but bring them into this work so they can understand, here's the role that our partners in government play, here's the role that community-based organizations play, here's the role for our business and philanthropic partners for us to really come together and be moving in the same direction. You know, I don't I've been here for a while, and I've not actually really seen this level of collaboration where folks are moving in the same direction before. That's one thing that gets us excited. We get up every day and you see that level of collaboration and partnership and folks' willingness to work together. You know, I think historically there have been times where folks have had opinions about public safety and what it means. And those opinions are great, but we prefer opinions with action, right? So if you come in and work with us, you can have all the opinions in the world because you're working with us to actually build out solutions. So it's a pleasure to get to do that work because we get to do it with good partners who are thoughtful, who have experience, who are really committed to making this city better. It's not just folks tweeting about the city of Chicago from Kentucky. Nothing wrong with Kentucky, but I prefer if you have opinions on Chicago, you actually be in Chicago. So that's some of the work that we're doing, and I've been excited about it. And again, we have great partners to be able to push that work forward.
I'd like to bring Superintendent Snelling back into the conversation. Talk about community collaboration and initiatives specifically from the CPD perspective. And then, and Garen, please feel free to come in on this. And also if we could talk a little bit about, you've both alluded to the perception of public safety versus the reality of public safety. And so talk a little bit about where that stands as well, but start with the collaborative initiatives and from your perspective. Well,
the collaborative initiatives, and especially you're talking to Gary about how much we talk on a regular basis. I didn't know he was married. I wanted to no, seriously, we are always talking. The collaboration goes beyond just community, right? We need to look at neighborhoods. We need to rebuild or build relationships. For far too long, we look at the relationships or lack thereof that Chicago Police Department has had with communities, marginalized communities, and along with the business community and whoever else in between that we need to reach out and touch. Right now, I can tell you our outreach right now to our communities has grown. We still have some work to do. Reaching out, I'm constantly talking to our business leaders, our business community, along our retail corridors, because they have concerns, major concerns about their businesses, crime, things of that nature. And we're collaborating in a way where I understand what it is they're looking for, their needs. They have an understanding of what it is that we're doing as a police department. And to that end, when we look at downtown, and probably what you'll see more of our younger police officers who will be walking the beats, more officers on bikes who are able to get to locations a lot quicker. We want our officers communicating with people and making people feel comfortable and safe and welcome. The bigger issue that we had when I took this position is that we had officers sitting in vehicles with the light strobe. I just didn't feel that did much to make the community feel safe. It's just a car sitting there with lights on. It's only a matter of time before people who are thinking of committing a crime realize that car is just sitting there. But we want deterrence, and deterrence will now make people feel a lot safer. If the crime isn't being committed, people feel more comfortable. They feel more comfortable walking. And when a person knows that they can reach out, see an officer, have a conversation with an officer, or an officer stops in your business and just ask you how everything is going, not only does that business owner feel a lot more comfortable, but the patrons do also. So it's pretty far-reaching, that type of connection. Our community connection, even with our detective division. Right now, trying to remove violent criminals from the street. The reason that this is important, and when I say remove violent criminals from the street, because what we find in the city of Chicago right now is that violent criminals are also repeat offenders. When we look at our robberies, we have robbery crews out there, people that we've arrested, some of them juveniles, some of them adults, who are released and they go right back out and they do the same thing again. When we are focused on a more intelligence-driven style of policing, we create stronger cases This will help us keep those very violent criminals off the street. This lessens the number of victims or people who are victimized by violent crimes. And this help builds a lot more confidence in our police department. It also, again, makes people feel safer. But going beyond that, and this is where City Hall comes in, this is where Garion comes in. As a police department, we have been working one way for a century, right? We're the police, there's enforcement, we'll try deterrence. The problem is that we see people on their worst days. We come in contact with people when they have you name it. We can run the gamut of problems that people face. Police officers are not always equipped to deal with those situations. This is now where other city agencies come into place and they partner with us. So for instance, when we're dealing with people who have mental health issues, as a police department, we have training on how to deal with that. But what do we do with that person once we have that person in custody? How do we get those people help? Children. We have children who are suffering right now. Look around. We have children who are not parented. And a lot of times what we have to look at is the parent, right? And what I mean by that is a lot of times we blame the parents, and I hear it all the time. Well, how come the parents don't know where these kids are? And in a lot of cases, we need to hold parents accountable for knowing where their children are. But for some of these young people who have problems, if you follow them home and knock on the door, someone with problems will answer. So it has to be further reaching. You have to get into the home. So it can't just be the children. You have to treat the entire
So this speaks to the holistic
situation.
Approach from
Yes.
the mayor's office.
Yes, so now just partnering together with the mayor's office, having a collaborative effort toward public safety, because it's not just one thing. It's not just one thing. There's so many things that affect crime in this city. And when we get to the bottom of people who are suffering in silence, and those people who will now turn to crime because they have no other alternatives, when we can provide some type of resources for those individuals, is very helpful. Now, there are two parts to that.
Forgive me, we're running out of time a little bit, and I know everyone, can't leave everyone in suspense, but I saw Thomas, Thomas, I know you had something to add to that. What I'm going to ask you to do is do that as part of sort of concluding remarks I'm going to ask of everyone here. We're 4.5 years past this just upheaval in our economy, in our social fabric. What have we learned relative to your areas of expertise, and what do we need to work more on? So Thomas, feel free to very briefly, if you include something about the superintendent's remarks relative to that.
The brief comment was, when I hear about safety and violence, I also think about the violence we face on our streets, where thousands of our fellow citizens have serious injuries or die as a result of traffic violence, and how a competitive advantage for Chicago is, to the extent we can shift people to a much safer mode of travel, we're going to help reduce violence levels on our street and improve safety. So that's an interesting opportunity for collaboration. In terms of looking what we've learned, I think that for Chicago, there's this challenge we have on the transportation front and the transit funding front, the transit governance front, is really an opportunity, especially for the business community, to step up and say, if we're going to be a global metro, if we're going to compete in a global economy, if we're going to develop the economic heft we need to afford social service and anti-crime initiatives, we need a good public transit system. And we need the business community to help articulate why it's important to have affordable mobility, why the funding mechanisms should be as much as possible user fee based rather than taxes, and why, if Chicago is going to evolve into an attractive, sustainable, equitable city, it needs a viable public transit system.
Thank you. Gary?
I'll say what some of the things that we've learned from the pandemic is, Chicago is resilient. Right? We bounce back from everything, and I think one big piece of this is understanding the level of collaboration that's needed. Everything that we see is an example of how we can work together. The fact that we were able to vaccinate so many people across the city during that pandemic, the fact that we're able to bring in so many new arrivals and take care of them through another massive episode, the fact that we are able to currently sit in a place where, through collaborative efforts, driving violence down across all major categories in the city, shows that we can do this together, and it's a matter of actually bringing folks together to the table to work in areas and focusing. Right? I think that's the pieces that we need to continue to work on, that level of collaboration and partnership. And having public partnerships is going to be really important, because a public partnership creates shared accountability. Because it does me no good to be my partner behind closed doors. Come outside with me and be a partner so you can actually see some of the real things that people experience, so we can know how to invest and move forward.
I will build on that, and I think similarly for this mission, government can't do it alone, even though it required an intergovernmental collaboration, city, state, county, and our federal government. But if you all remember last fall, there were almost 4,000 people sleeping in police stations and at the airport because we couldn't keep up opening shelters quickly enough. We had weeks when 2,500 people arrived to Chicago. But who stepped up? Mutual aid groups emerged, everyday Chicagoans, suburbanites who came in to help people just out of the kindness of their hearts, organizations, nonprofits, philanthropy, and business. And we have seen massive millions of items donated by corporate partners, by United Way, by groups like the Greater Chicago Food Depository, Cradles to Crayons, New Life Centers, so many organizations. And so I think that in terms of being hopeful and thinking to the future is how do we continue to activate those resources in deeper partnerships that build on what government can do, but really that activate just the civic and other types of resources that our city has.
Superintendent, I feel so badly about cutting you off, so you get the last word of the panel. So.
Not at all. Just, well, I'll keep it brief. Two things, opportunity and preparation. When you have the opportunity to do something great, you should be prepared. And what I learned from 2020 is that the randomness of everything that occurred after the George Floyd situation, that when you're not prepared, it's always going to be a failing effort. So when you have the opportunity to respond to something and respond to it the best that you possibly can, you have to be prepared for that moment. So as a police agency, as a police department, we have to constantly prepare for the worst. Obviously, we always hope for the best. But in order to do that, we have to build structure around our entire city. Embrace everyone within our city, bring them in. And once we're able to bring everyone in, we can get ideas from everyone in the city, have a clear understanding, because the city is made up of a complex number of people. And if we are not focusing on the needs of every single person in the city, then we're failing. So training, preparation, constant education, and evolving in a direction that's going to help our department and help our city as a whole.
What a great note to end on. Thank you very much. Let me turn it over to Margaret to close us out. Thank you.
I will be brief, so thank you all. Thank you very much to Thomas, Gary, and Beatrice, Larry, and Jeff for your open and insightful discussion. We appreciate you. I love this quote. I'm going to steal from you that success is when opportunity meets preparation, and I'm so grateful to all of you for all the work that you're doing to make sure that we are prepared to capitalize on these opportunities. I know that a lot of you would like to speak to our panelists. That's why we're ending just a little bit early. Feel free to stick around. We are here until I think 6:30 or so. And so we'll give you plenty of time to keep this conversation going amongst yourselves and with them. Have a great evening.